Hi, welcome back to Inside the Studio. I'm here today with Mark Heine from Victoria. So thank you, Mark, for joining me this afternoon, or it's morning perhaps in Victoria. But
No,
it's great.
just
It's
turned
great.
afternoon.
It's great to have you with me for an hour to speak about some of your incredible things going on in your life. Um, so
Thanks for
thank
having
Yeah,
me.
thank you very much. You've been an artist for about 34 years, and you certainly come from an extremely artistic family, um, all accomplished and all interesting, I'm sure.
Yeah, we've got lots of us out there. Both my sisters are fine artists, and I've been actually for 39 years now. I think I have
Ah,
to update my biography.
you do.
Yeah, so I started out actually as a commercial illustrator, like my father was in the commercial industry, and then after a certain amount of time, he switched over and went into the fine art side of things, and I've kind of followed in his footsteps and have switched over to fine art as well.
I'm sure you've had a most interesting life living under your father's direction and the influences in your family. And so I want to talk in particular right now about something that is incredibly fascinating. And perhaps you can tell us what you're up to, Mark, in terms of going to the moon.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. It actually started for me back in 2015. There's a publisher down in the US that was selecting artists to be in a publication called 50 Memorable Artists for 2015. And I was invited to be one of the 50, which I was, honored to be, and in great company with a lot of really top end people down in the U.S. And so I was thrilled to be just involved in the publication. And then years later, come to now, and the publication has been selected to be included in the Astrobotic uh, Moonbox time capsule. It's called, which is going to the moon in January, or no, December, coming December, and they're taking digitized versions of various publications. And I think one of the main reasons why they're sending publications as opposed to just artwork is that artwork can be pretty subjective, without any kind of explanation. And in these publications, the artists were given the opportunity to explain what they were trying to convey. And so we wrote an article that is included with the images. So in a time capsule kind of way, if somebody does come across this at some time in the future, there's an explanation of what the art actually means from the artist. And then there's a lot of music going as well, musicians going, and some authors as well are being included. So it's an interesting process because since I've been selected to go on this thing, I've become kind of a friend with Dr. Peralta, who's a physicist, astrophysicist in Toronto, who's been put in charge of curating this whole, they call it the Lunar Codex. And so he's been going around and deciding what is included, but there's also a very technical process because this is a lunar launch and weight is important. And it turns out that he used to get his information burned onto gold microfiche, and you can print at 20,000 dots per inch onto gold microfiche. So you can cram a lot of information on there. But since it's been recently discovered that that nickel microfiche can contain up to 200,000 dots per inch, so you can fit a lot. You can fit 10 times as much information onto nickel. So they're burning all this stuff onto nickel microfiche, and then the launch itself is kind of interesting because it's the first ever commercial flight to the moon. So the payload of the lander is actually taking experiments and whatever commercial activity is paying for the flight, but they're including the time capsule because it's a kind of a historic thing where it's the first commercial flight to the moon, and it's actually the first NASA launched rocket to land on the moon in over 50 years since Apollo 17. So
It's unmanned,
it's unmanned. Yep. Mm-hmm.
right? And what two images will be going on the voyage?
Well, it's strange because the two images that were selected for that publication were beyond my control. So the publisher chose two of my paintings, and so it was their choice really what to include. And so there's two paintings. The originals are both 20 by 30, I think it is. Yeah, 20 by 30. One's horizontal, one's vertical, and they're images of my current project that I've been working on for 7 years now. And they're actually paintings of mythological characters underwater. So the series that I'm working on right now is called Sirens, and it's a combination of writing and painting. And the way my working process goes is I've written this book called Sirens, and I'm actually working on a sequel to it as well. But Sirens is a work of fiction in the genre of magical realism. So it's kind of a Harry Potter type of thing. My concept is that the book itself was written for a young adult audience, and my thinking is that young people these days, everyone's being bombarded with science about climate change and global warming and 2 degrees, and this has to be done in the next 50 years. It can get a little bit kind of depressing and daunting, I think, for young people, because it's not good news, everything that you hear. And so my idea is to actually get them engaged in a story. And this story is about the world's oceans and how we deal with the life and the pollution and all the environmental damage that's done to the world's ocean. I'm trying to give the ocean a voice, and so I've selected this mythological creature as a siren because a siren is famous for its voice. So the idea behind the story is to try and create an exciting storyline that's interesting for young people to read, but has an underlying tone of environmental stewardship and sustainable thinking. And when I started this project, I wanted to figure out some way of maybe reaching young people and getting the ball rolling in terms of changing their attitudes towards the environment. And it seemed to me that, well, with my skill set, I'm a painter and I write, so that seemed to be the right combination for what I can do to make a difference. And that's kind of how it started. So each painting that I do, including the two that are going to the moon, are visualizations of key moments in the Sirens book. So there's certain things happening in the book, and I come up with a visual for what I'm writing, and then I go off and I do a painting of it. And while I'm doing the painting, I'm thinking of the storyline. And so I paint a little while and I come up with ideas for the book, and then I have to go back and write those ideas down, and that gives me ideas for painting. So it goes constantly back and forth. And there's actually an odd kind of thing that happens too. The painting I'm working on right now, actually, it doesn't really have any place in the book now, not yet. So I find that quite often I come up with an idea for a painting that I want to do, but once I've done the painting, I have to figure out how to work that into the story. So the painting actually drives the storyline as well as the storyline drives the painting. So it's an interesting process.
You have a painting behind you, Mark. Is that sort of part of the overall series?
Yes, that this one is part of the series. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I've got there's 83 paintings in the series now, 84 actually, including the one I'm working on, which is almost done. So there's too many to fit in a book, and it'd be too expensive to try and print them all and put them into the book. But I'm hoping that some of the paintings will make it into the actual book itself. And I've certainly got lots of cover art if I've got that all worked out.
I used to have an old art history professor who had coined a term when he was specifically talking about Alex Colville's work, and he called it phantasmagorical.
Mm.
And so your work strikes me as having that element of it is somewhat real because the female form is identifiable, but they're going to places that no human figure could ever go to, for all these fantastic places underwater. And what is it about that type of subject matter that intrigues you so much?
It was just an experiment to do this whole project. My wife is a professional editor, which is quite handy, and she also is a costume designer. She's a professional costume designer who she does some film, some TV, a lot of theater work, and so it's something that kind of just came together between her skills with sewing and of course editing, and then my stuff with the painting and the writing. Together we came up with this idea to do this project, and she did the costumes. So we have 2 volunteer sirens available to us. We've got a third one coming this year, but one is my youngest daughter, Sarah, and the other is a family friend named Erica, who is a few years younger. And so one day we made up these costumes. We kind of designed how a siren would dress, where things are held together with wrappings. There's no finished edges. It's not supposed to look like a commercially produced costume. So we built these costumes for the girls, and then it's too cold in the ocean, even in the summertime off the West Coast, to get them in the ocean. So we found a lake in the central Vancouver Island that is anaerobic. So it doesn't get algae blooms in the summertime, and the water is nice and clear. So we took them out one day and we dressed them up in these costumes, and we got in the water, and I have a series of underwater cameras mounted on a bar that I kind of put together. And so they went underwater, and we started shooting, some with video, some with stills, and really didn't know what we were going to get. We really didn't have much an idea what we were going to get. And when you're underwater with a mask on and all these cameras are in housings, you have no idea what you're actually shooting. You just kind of point the camera in a certain direction, give them a little bit of physical guidance to follow what to do, and then shoot as many shots as you can. And so when we emerged from the water and we went for lunch afterwards, and so I'm sitting there looking through the images on the camera, and just amazing stuff. I was just absolutely blown away with the stuff, because the costumes were designed to be very light. I mean, the fabrics were chosen to be flowing in the water. So what's interesting about figures underwater is that there's so many different types of motion going on. There's the flow and the suspension of gravity of the fabric, and then there's shafts of broken light. They're coming through, the ripples on the surface, and then the actual reflection of the figure in the surface above is moving as well. And then there's suspended particles in the water, and so there's just so much going on. And it makes it a very challenging subject, because if you've got an arm in the sunlight, it's one color, basically shadows and things, but underwater it's all covered with broken light. and so it makes things very, very complicated. And there's a lot of reflected color that happens underwater because there's suspended particulate in the water, and it picks up color that's reflected off the figure. So there's all these things going on. And the first few paintings I did, I was trying to follow the material I had pretty closely to learn about painting underwater. And you start to recognize certain characteristics. And then once you understand that you're getting extra reflected color, let's say, you can start to exaggerate those things. You can start to play with those things that are unique to the underwater situation, and all that can come together to focus your painting on the focal point. So all that complexity becomes a tool that you can use to create some interesting paintings.
Well, it's a wonderful series, and I'm sure you're thanking your lucky stars that you actually have a wife that is able to design a costume so that you can create these wonderful creations. What is it about the Femme Fatale and the Sirens that has got your goat, and you want to tell a bit of a story?
Well, yeah, the when I first started writing the book, actually, I wrote it offshore. As a matter of fact, I was on a sailboat trip from Victoria to Hawaii and back, and so the outline was written during 54 days of open ocean sailing. So it was a bit of an adventure, but it was the right place to be to write, something about the ocean. And I wanted I needed a creature that was basically amphibious, that could be in the ocean and could theoretically be on land. So playing with the Greek mythology, but I had a problem because I didn't want my sirens to be necessarily recognized as femme fatale. They are misunderstood. So the original femme fatale description was written in Homer's Odyssey, but the actual but the actual character of Sirens it predates Homer by about 5,000 years. So Sirens, the mythological being, has been found on ancient Greek tombs, and the old sirens were never meant to be femme fatale. They meant something else in the culture, and it's Homer's interpretation for the Odyssey that turned them into this femme fatale character. So in my book, I had to kind of write a little Greek myth that debunks the femme fatale character and changes the character. But what I'm trying to do, because my story is set on the west coast of Canada, and it's about the environment, it's about threats from oil tankers that are pipelines are planned to build to bring oil to the coastline, and it's a huge threat around here, and so that is part of what I wanted to try and address. And so I've got the Eastern philosophy of Homer, and then included in the story, because it's West Coast, is the West Coast Coast Salish mythology. And when I started the project, I actually contacted the Sechot First Nation people on the west coast of Vancouver Island, and got into talks with them about mythology, and I was asking them about water type of creatures, siren type of creatures, and it turns out that there is a lot of Coast Salish mythology, and Coast Salish mythology is a spoken mythology. So it's not written down; it's a spoken kind of storyline, and a lot of what does remain of Coast Salish, ancient Coast Salish culture, is hieroglyphics and petroglyphs, and indeed the petroglyphs around the coastline here that date back 30,000 years. They depict creatures like mermaids and sirens, and there's stories of mermaids emerging from the ocean, and it's all part of the mythology of the Coast Salish people. And so, it's two cultures that are completely world apart, on separate sides of the planet, but have some really interesting mythology that is quite closely related, even though it comes from two different places. So it's kind of a East Coast or Eastern culture meets Western culture, and we look at in Canada. One of the reasons why I decided to put the book on the West Coast is that we have a very Eurocentric view of the world. We come from Europe, and so the population has been spreading from a Europe base, but actually the West Coast of Canada was the earliest populated part of North America, because the first people came over the Bering Sea ice bridge,
right,
and
right,
down the coastline. So the people that live here are the ancestors of everybody that lives
right,
in North America, and
right.
so it's their view from a Western point of view predates our view by quite a few thousand years. So it's just an interesting perspective to have the two of them kind of meet face to face. And in the story, there's one of the main characters is a native man who ultimately falls in love with one of the Sirens, and so there's quite a cultural exchange going on there.
Does it have a happy ending?
Well, actually, it does. Much to my wife's anger, she thinks it's too happy. But I wanted, this is for young people. I want them to feel positive, and it doesn't actually end. It was written to not end. There's certainly a climax, and there's multiple sort of venturous moments in the story all the way through. And there is at the very end, there's a climactic kind of thing that happens. But it leaves the story open for the next the next book. So a sequel.
Do we have any timelines, Mark, as to when we might see the book come to fruition?
Well, the book actually is it's on its 7th edit now.
Okay.
So Lisa and I have been back and forth, and that's another thing. My wife, being an editor, I have the luxury of basically free editing services. Nice. And I probably wouldn't be in my 7th edit if I was paying for it.
That's right.
That's pretty much guaranteed. Yeah,
that's right.
So the 7th edit is pretty much done, and it's back in her hands now. So I think we're at the point where we're pretty close to just getting the story out now. And so the process is to look for a literary agent and hopefully get them to find a publisher in the traditional style of publishing, where I can get it into bookstores. And because self-publishing is great, and that may be what happens, but I've heard that it's you're one in a million self-published books out there, and so I'd like to try going the traditional route with a literary agent. And when it comes to that, I run into this is new territory, so I have no idea how long that takes, and if it will happen. They say that I've been doing a bit of research, and they say that you should approach at least 100 literary agents before you give up and go self-publishing. So yeah, it's going to be a while.
Wow.
But we're close.
You're getting there. Just to circle back for a minute, to go back to the Moon Project. And of course it begs wild fantasy and imagination as to what's going to happen. So the capsule is going to land on the moon and remain on the moon.
Mm-hmm. It's
forever.
going to. Well, it's interesting. Yeah, it's staying there, and the it's going to a region called Lacus Mortis, which is Dead Lake, which I thought was appropriate for Sirens. And another funny thing about the story of Sirens and this stuff going to the moon is that the book itself, the Sirens book, is about human evolution. And we're at the point in our species where we have to evolve and change the way we do things in terms of environmental stewardship and sustainability. So we really have to evolve. And if we don't evolve, we go the way of the dinosaur. And so the story is about human nature. Human nature, we as a society, we rush to the aid of earthquake disasters or hurricane, disasters or floods or tsunamis. We all rush with all kinds of support to an immediate threat, but we do not change the way we behave for a passive threat. So it's kind of a pot and the frog type of scenario where you put a frog in a boiling water or pot of boiling water and it'll jump free. And if you put it in a pot of cold water and heat it slowly, it will sit there and basically boil to death. And that's kind of the way we are. And that is rooted, actually, I've been doing some psychological research into it. It's rooted in our very nature. As we go back into primitive man reacted to a present threat. And so, okay, lions running at you, run the other way, right? So that's the way we're programmed. And we may have, fancy housing now and vehicles, technology, but we're still in that mindset of if it's a passive threat, it's not a threat at all. Right. So what happens in the story is that option is taken away from us, that there is a threat, a very, what would you call it? Genocidal threat against mankind that comes from somewhere. And we are forced to deal with it as a present threat, as opposed to a long-term passive threat. And so that is kind of the basis of the story is to, okay, we have to deal with this now, which is really a microcosm of what we're doing in reality. We have to deal with the way things are going now, and we better take it as a present threat, because we can't just push it down the road anymore to the kids, because we're here now.
The day of reckoning is upon us.
Yeah. So it's interesting that the stuff, when it goes to the moon with an explanation of the story of Sirens, it will, if it's found in the future by humans, then we, I guess, did make those adjustments.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought.
And if it's found in the future by aliens who are somehow capable of understanding it, they will understand that we understood this existential threat, but we weren't able to rise to the challenge, and we all basically perished. So it'll be up there anyway. And you can't really have a time capsule on the Earth, because with the atmosphere and change, the Earth is constantly changing, and that's why going back to ancient Earth history, we look at the pyramids that go maybe 10,000 BC, and the first really kind of human settlement. That's still around because of just the monolithic size of the structures, but we lose so much of history on Earth, whereas 10,000 years on the moon, it'll still be there, maybe a little bit dustier, but not much changes on the moon. So it's a great place to have a time capsule.
Well, that I think Elon Musk is headed to the moon with a bunch of adventurers.
Oh, is he? Yeah,
supposedly so.
I heard that they were going up. Bezos is going up on his rocket, and Branson's going up on his rocket, and everyone's all interested in the moon again. Apparently, the Canadian Canada is very interested in returning to the moon and using a moon base as a jumping off point for Mars. And
Yes.
it's interesting because I have a friend of mine who's got a young son who's an engineer, and he's determined to become an astronaut and go to Mars. He wants to go to Mars. So he was very excited. He's a very young guy. I think he's 19 now, but just a brilliant genius kid that's all scholarship to high heaven. And so that's his thing, is to get to Mars. So I told him that since I've got my stuff on the moon, he has to take something of my work to Mars, and then I can be on 2 planets. Well, technically 1 planet, 1 moon, but I could be the first to be an artist that is on both Mars and the moon. So
wouldn't that be cool? I was just reading this morning, or saw something. It's called the Infinite. It's a virtual exhibition aboard the International Spaceship, which is being launched out of a studio in Montreal. Okay. It opens July the 21st to November the 7th, 2021. And yes, you're absolutely right. I've been seeing a lot of promotion now about space and all, and people are very interested in, and that probably is from the Mars landing recently, but I think it just catches people's imagination, and perhaps people do want to escape what we've done on this planet.
Yeah, but there's no salvation out there. We got to deal with what is going on here, because there is no hopping on a spaceship and going to live on Mars, because the amount of effort it takes to survive on Mars, there's not a possibility that we can go and inhabit that, and all the other possible Earth-like planetary objects that they discover are all light years away, and pretty much impossible to so we have to deal with what we've got here now. I think that's the most important part.
I don't think it will be in our lifetime, Mark, but it's an interesting thought. I think we're going to have to wind up. And anyway, I do thank you very much for spending time with me this afternoon. Your story has been most intriguing, not only your book publication, but of course your project. And I'm sure that you have other things of interest that you will be working on in your mind already.
Oh yeah, definitely. Lots of stories. And my daughter is a writer as well. And so she and I spend our evenings on Zoom calls talking about stories. So writing and storytelling is definitely big in our family.
Well, I wish you all the best, Mark. And thank you very much for sharing with me. And we will see what happens. Please keep me in the loop and let me know if any extraterrestrials see your work, and I can be your agent.
Yeah, you could be my off-planet agent.
I could be your planetary art agent.
It's been a pleasure chatting with you, and thanks for hearing me out.
You're quite welcome. I wish you all the best, Mark.
Cheers. Thank you very much.
Take care. Thank you.
Thanks, John.